very pleased to be here on My Magical Thing with Britta Love, somatic sex educator, writer, and weaver of many worlds. So Britta, it's fantastic to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
So Britta, please may we see your magical thing?
You may. Oops.
Oh, yes.
Why am I struggling to find where to put this? Oh, here we are. Yes.
Yeah, got it.
And this
Please tell us the story of this remarkable, it's two-part magical thing. Fantastic.
It's a two-part magical thing that has now become a one thing. So to tell this story, I have to kind of go back to the times of my early 20s. And this is a time when I think I'm pre-spiritual awakening. I don't even have an altar full of magical things. It was a time when I had started experimenting a lot with ketamine. And I was one day in my flat with my partner in London, and we were deep in the K-hole, and I was staring into the wall, which was like kind of painted this dark brown. And from deep in the wall emerges this like very, such an intense figure, this dark, intense figure. And I couldn't really tell you how to describe it in words, but it left like this powerful impression, and it felt Egyptian to me. And all I can tell you is that in response to seeing that vision, I immediately got down on one knee. And now this is someone who was raised as like a, cultural Jew, atheist in New York City, right? I had no sort of spiritual background. I hadn't been interested in mythology. I kind of thought that religion and spirituality sort of led the world astray. I had like very like arrogant views on all of that at that time. And there I was down on one knee in my living room. And I just had this like intense feeling that like the boss is back and I've really been behind on my mission. And I suddenly knew very clearly, I was like, oh, damn, what am I doing here? So what else can I tell you from that moment, if there's anything else that was important to know? But because it was a profound vision, but it left me very confused. Like the next day I was like, who was this figure, this dark figure? Why did I recognize them? What am I supposed to do? What is this mission that I kind of felt intuitively, but I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing? And so I kind of continued on stumbling. I'd been struggling with addiction before that, and ketamine became sort of a new place to sort of escape to. So it was kind of a dual-edged, it was like medicine because I was having this spiritual awakening, I was learning about myself, but it was also kind of like, didn't know how to integrate. There wasn't such a great psychedelic culture around teaching you how to use these things consciously, and I was just sort of stumbling around. So, in that time, I had taken to this compact mirror that I had bought on Brick Lane in some little store, and it had this, it's all the glass broke now, which is sad, but it has this little compartment. And so I'd taken to keeping my shards of ketamine crystals in my compact mirror so that I could have it with me wherever I wanted. And I was also doing some work as an escort in my young 20s while I was at college. So I had a client who used to whisk me off to Paris regularly. And so I was going to see my client in Paris, and I told him all about, because he was a really lovely fellow, and he's told me all, like I would tell him all the sort of artistic and weird things I was doing, and he kind of had the soul of a poet, and he never got to live that life, and his father forced him to become an engineer, and he worked out in the oil fields as an engineer, and he kind of loved being the patron of like, a young person who was getting to do all the artistic and creative things that he didn't get to do. So I would tell him these stories. And so when I went to Paris, he was like, well, what do you want to do? I mean, you just had that vision. And I was like, well, can we go to the Louvre and look at the Egypt halls? Like, I want to find out, what, what was going on. And so I kind of was wandering the halls, and I didn't recognize any of the figures still. So I couldn't solve the mystery of who the figure was in my wall. as I'm there sort of, still kind of sneakily taking little bumps of ketamine to try to reconnect to the magic. And I get back from Paris and I look up, I don't know what I was searching online, but I found this trip that was going with this woman who channeled from like the Pleiades. I never read her books. I didn't know if I even believed in what she did, but actually, was it from Pleiades? I can't even remember, but she channeled from somewhere. And I was like, whoa, it was a spiritual tour of Egypt, and you got to go to all these closed sites that, and I thought, well, I would love to go to Egypt with a group of people who want to meditate in the temples and not just like on some kind of tourist thing, or a different kind of tourist thing. But so I was like, hi, and I just sent my client an email and said, we should go to Egypt with the link to this trip.
Very good.
Woke up the next morning and I had an email from him saying, send me your bank details. I'm sending you to Egypt. So I ended up on this wild trip to Egypt, and I look back and I'm like, it was a very strange new age environment full of like kind of wealthy Midwestern white women who were, from the States, who were, out on all kinds of like tangents, and it's a very strange environment. And there I was, this like 22-year-old who left the ketamine behind and went to Egypt to sort of find the thing in my wall that had appeared to me in a trip. And so, so I get to Hathor's temple, and it was the first temple that I felt connected in, because I was really struggling. I didn't have like a really good meditation practice or anything that really grounded me in my newfound spirituality. But I felt something immediately in Hathor's temple, and I kind of walked down to this little zodiac room with the zodiac on the ceiling. And I was having this like very beautiful moment. And then a guard walked in, and he was like, come, I teach you how to pray. And he had a big gun. And I was like, oh, and he pushed me up against the wall and he started assaulting me. And so I had this very traumatic experience in this temple, and like it was lucky that one of the three men on the trip walked into the temple just when he was starting to try to like just kiss me, and I just said, oh, my husband's here, and I walked out, and I was very traumatized. So I stayed back from the trip after that. I was like in this 2 days, I didn't leave the hotel room because I felt very vulnerable in these sites. And so I mentioned that because it's relevant to what happens next. So the next night I finally feel ready to go. There's like a big thing we're doing. There's a closed temple that God knows she must have bribed someone to get access to at like 4 a.m. We had like armed guards like bringing us in the dark to Sekhmet's temple at Karnak. And so I don't know why I stayed up all night. I couldn't figure out like what I needed to wear, because we had to wear white. I never wore white, and I was trying to figure out how to wear white and feel authentic to me, because clothes are very like important magic for me. And it was like there were so many weird things about that evening. And then I like walked off the bus, and like I felt like the intensity of all the kind of like guard dogs and armed men around. But then I just felt like I needed to feel my feet on the ground. So I took my sandals off, and I felt all this electricity like pumping up my legs. And then we're let into this temple 6 at a time. It's a tiny little space. And I kind of knew that I would be the first person in my group to be let in, like before they even counted us off. And sure enough, I walk in, and I swear the being that I saw on my wall, Sekhmet, exactly in the same posture and position, and the woman who walks in next to me gets down on one knee. I mean, I would have too, but my legs were like turning to jelly. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the being from my wall. So I had this very powerful experience. The woman who led the trip said something like, Sekhmet is like demonized as this like goddess of, like violence and pestilence and destruction, but she's actually the forgotten, like, feminine strength or dark feminine. And I felt this immediately. And there were 2 witches on the trip who afterwards were like, you're here for this initiation into the dark feminine so that you can like get in touch with your power. And I realized in retrospect, I'd been doing this very devotional practice as a sacred whore, and had felt connected in Hathor's temple. but I was really vulnerable. I didn't have that. Was completely disconnected from the dark feminine and that power. So I came back from that trip. I was still struggling with ketamine, but I found my way with psychedelics, with ayahuasca, and eventually iboga. Found my way to a place in Costa Rica to work with a 12th generation Ganga to heal with my addiction. And we had to bring like an object that we were going to like cleanse as part of our spiritual cleansing to release from our addiction. And so I brought my compact mirror, and I, washed it in the river, and I realized that I was leaving it behind, but I needed to not physically leave it behind. And instead it just sort of became Sekhmet's throne, because that's her power, is the power of sitting, sort of going into the darkness, going into the chaos, letting your life fall apart, as mine did for those years, to find my spiritual power, my strength, and my purpose. So they sit on my altar now to remind me that, and I'm still in her service.
My goodness me. Britta, thank you very, very much for sharing that story. That is really, really appreciated. And the image of Sekhmet, which I mean, very similar to the one that I'm familiar with from the British Museum, where does that particular sculpture come from?
Oh, that's right. I missed that out. So after my experience in Sekhmet's temple, I stopped at one of those just little stands in Egypt where they're selling all the little tchotchkes to take home.
Oh.
And that was the one that was just staring at me. And so she's been with me ever since. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Britta Love, for sharing that tale of power and transformation and the dark feminine. That is really appreciated, my friend. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I'll see you again. Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Cheerio. Bye.